So, some lessons learned while I was here. So I'll warn you in advance. I was actually, when I first started thinking about it, I was going to apologize for some of the content and, warn you that you might get offended. But then I went to the Sustainable Forestry Seminar, and Vic said the speaker there does that all the time and actually ticks people off, and he hopes he does it here. So I figure that's a license to go ahead because the boss said so. So there are a couple, though, I will warn you anyway, there are a couple of grumpy old man sections in here. So the first thing is we should be incredibly proud of the role that this university has played in providing environmental management information for the oil sands. All of these charts are taken from the bibliography, right? So these are real. I'm not making this stuff up. This is the contribution that we've made relative to other people, including some that you think would have a much higher profile, like some of the government agencies and other things like that. This is really important, right? And we should be proud, we should be promoting that. And in fact, even though the headline appeared a little childish and that kind of stuff, the fact is that it's absolutely true. We have every right to be saying that we are a dominant force in providing environmental management information for the oil sands. And there's absolutely no shame in saying that that's the case, right? But all of this work that we did, it's not just big brain profs who are doing it, right? We are absolutely heads above anyone else in terms of the number of theses that are coming out with respect to environmental management of the mineable oil sands. So again, these are all our future leaders. We're providing those opportunities, and we should be making sure everyone knows that this kind of statistic is out there, right? That we are the leaders. It's also kind of interesting because I would have expected, these names in here maybe, but some of the ones on the far end are just really weird. You get these, at Texas, University of Texas A&M has a thesis, and some out of Norway and Sweden going, really? How cool is that? So again, it's something that we should be really proud of in terms of how we've provided support for development of the oil sands. There's absolutely no doubt that there's a ton of information out there, and a lot of it is recent. So I'm telling you this because it's a good thing and a bad thing, right? It's a good thing because you've got lots of information at your fingertips to build into your plans and to support the arguments that you're making and all of that. It's a bad thing because you've got all that information and you should be wading through it to understand what's going on. So I will share with you that colleagues of a particular age, sort of like mine, have been starting to remark that people are getting lazy. They aren't doing that. I don't know whether it's because money's easy and you can just go and get it, that's the perception, or whether it's because there's so much that you just don't have the time to do it. But it's a perception thing, and if people are starting to notice that, that's not good. We need to be making sure that at least we're aware of it, that we give a sense for the fact that we understand that there's a bunch of information out there, and that we will be planning on using it as we go forward in our work. But it's not all new. So again, getting back to this idea that there's historical information out there, it drives me insane when people say, I just want to use recent stuff. I had a postdoc recently. I gave him a link to something to look at, and I said, actually, I know this is old, but you should look at some of the newer stuff. And he came back and he said, this is 20 years old. I'm not sure that this is valid anymore. It's information. It's valid forever. Whether or not it's up to date, it's used new standards and methods and all that kind of stuff is irrelevant. The fact is you've got some information there, and you shouldn't dismiss it just because it's older than you are, right? Okay, so here's the first grumpy old man one. So, and this is not the right audience to be doing this in, obviously, but there's more to life than peer-reviewed journals. I get why they're important in an academic institution. But think of it, if these were experimental data and you came out and you said, you know what, there's a lot of data there, but 80% of it doesn't really agree with the way I think, so I'm not going to use it, you'd be laughed out of the organization, right? That's just not the way that you do work. And yet, there's a lot of people who say, well, you know, peer-reviewed journals are the only thing that we should be looking at. It's the only real information that's out there. And it drives me insane because there's a ton of information that's really useful. Yes, you can filter it. Yes, you can decide whether or not it's up to your professional standards. But if you don't do that first step and gather it and look at it and screen it yourself, as opposed to relying on some other people in some other place who looked at it and therefore it's peer-reviewed, you're making a huge mistake because you're missing out on a lot of really important information. So I sent to one of my researchers a thesis, and I said, you should build this into your study. And his response back was, thanks for these references. We found the peer-reviewed version of this, and that's what we've incorporated. And I'm thinking, really? So let me get this straight. You want to use the Reader's Digest 7-page version as opposed to the 119 pages of information that's available to you that contains a whole lot of other stuff that would be really relevant to your thing. Yes, again, you can look at it, you can screen it, but you're choosing to use a very condensed version simply because someone has put a stamp on it. I don't think that that's a very good approach. Having said that, and because I'm a mature and responsible adult, I will share this graph with you because we just finished our survey of research and information needs, and as it turns out, it doesn't matter what I think because everyone wants to use peer-reviewed journals. So, what can I do, right? All I can do is give you the message. So, the second grumpy old man thing. Information is the currency that we live by, right? And so when you put together information and give it to people, it reflects on you. And regardless of whether, remember we said before, I give money to a prof and it's really the students write it, I don't care. I gave money to you, the prof. It's your reputation. You live by what's written there. And I have to tell you that a lot of times what I've gotten is abysmal. It's horrible. It would be embarrassing to have go out. And, you know, whether it's because people are busy or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's your brand. That's what people recognize when they see it. They look at it when you submit a proposal. They look at it when you submit a final report. And it really does impact how people perceive the work that you do and therefore that we do collectively. And so I would really encourage you, before you press send, swallow your pride, get someone else to look at it and have them go through it. And ideally someone who doesn't do what you do, right? Because they'll see things or ask questions because they have a different perspective and they may not understand how you write things or whatever. But it is really important. And as a funder, it's incredibly frustrating to have given someone $20, $50, $100,000 and to have to go through the report with a fine-tooth comb and try and fix it so that it's useful for people outside. We've got this thing on campus called ERA, the Education and Research Archive. It is a fabulous tool to make information available to. That's where all of our stuff, all of our research reports are housed. That's where all of our digitized reports are housed. It's good because it provides permanent links, and anyone who has gone looking for information, especially in government sites, knows that they change links all the time because they change their structure. And you either never find it or you have to get rerouted a whole bunch of times. ERA provides permanent links. It's fabulous. Once you've got it, it's there forever. And it doesn't matter how they restructure or any of that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter whether they switch systems. That link is there forever. And I mean, it's got a search engine. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but you can go in and find stuff as well. But it's set up so that, for example, OSRIN has their own area within ERA, and then we've got sub areas. So there's a few of them shown here. We've got the OSRIN reports and some of the other ones that we've digitized, plus our own reports. You could have as many of those as you want. The only constraint is if you're going to post someone else's work, you have to have authorization to do that. So for all of the ones that we digitize, we got that. And there's a what's called a permission statement, which basically goes in and allows the people to say, well, if you're going to use this, here's some rules around it or some caveats that you should be aware of. And we have taken the step of attaching a copy of that to the back of the document, and we also put a little stamp on the front that says this was digitized with the permission of. But you can do whatever you want. So you can have all of your papers on there if you have the authority to put them up. You could have a whole bunch of different things in there. All of the student theses are on there from 2009 forward, and some of the older ones are on there as well. So again, a great place to house all of that stuff, to highlight the things that we've done. And if you're interested, if you go into the student thesis one, there's some amazing stuff that people are doing here. Some of it you look at and you say, oh, wow, I didn't even know that that was feasible. So it's really just interesting to kind of browse through it, never mind for the things that you're particularly looking at. One of the strengths that we have that other places might not is our ability to put together big multidisciplinary teams and provide integrated solutions. So I was at the COSIA Associate Members meeting, and they were talking about the projects in the land theme area. And I asked them, like, are you looking for individual projects, or are you looking for people to put together a whole bunch of projects that have similar ideas and put one big team together to give you that integrated solution? And their answer was interesting. They said probably both, right? Because there are some that would stand alone or that would make sense to have in different areas. But one of the things that we can do on campus is get people together from different disciplines and approach a problem in a multidisciplinary way. I see it happening every now and then, and maybe I'm just not privy to it, but there's a lot of one-off type projects. So maybe it's because we're competitive, maybe it's because we're all out chasing the same dime, but there seems to be, this is my project, my area of specialization, and here's what I can do for you, as opposed to stepping back and saying, you know, this problem has a bunch of facets, and I've got a bunch of people that I could bring together. There are pockets of it happening. So in the water initiative, for example, we were in that meeting, you know, and there's someone from business, someone from environment, or from, you know, the water side of things. Some of the projects that we've been doing have been joint between the biology department and the engineering department, which is an uncommon kind of pairing, but really nice to see. So I think we should build on those strengths, because it's something that we could do, and we could market ourselves as that provider of interdisciplinary solutions. But it's really hard to find who's doing what on campus. So I either was roped into doing or offered to do a seminar for the School of Energy and Environment. They used to have lunchtime seminars. And I was trying to think what I would do. And I said, well, I'll put together something on all the oil sands related research on campus. Should be easy, right? It wasn't. It was incredibly hard to figure out who's doing what. Now, I know when the water initiative was first starting, they had this really cool diagram up that had, you know, kind of a water background, and then all these different focus areas where people were working in, and they started putting names in there. And one of the cool things about it was people got pissed because their name wasn't on it, or they had the wrong thing in there. I said, great, we've got people talking. Now you're interested in being part of a team, right? You want to get in there and be part of it. That, to me, sends a really important message, and I don't see how that it would be all that difficult to do for a subject matter like oil sands, right? If that's based on those charts where our area of expertise, or one of our areas of expertise is, we should market that in a way that makes everyone aware of what our capabilities are. So on the ACRE website, for example, that we're working with Ellen on, there's a list of people. So that's one step, and it identifies what they are. But if you could organize that by subjects, or you could have some kind of a system where you could say, I'm interested in this, and these 6 people pop up, that would be really useful for people. I know the School of Energy and Environment tried to do that. They brought a student in. It was very difficult to do, I think in part because they were trying to make it too complex. I think simple is easy, and probably would have worked. But I think that's an opportunity for someone on campus to say, you know what, here's something that we could do that would make ourselves easier to market, because people are coming in to look for information, and if they don't know that there's a broad suite of people, they're just going to go to the ones that they know. And they may not be in this institution, or maybe somewhere else, right? So if we can make them aware of the fact that we've got all these people who are working on this, and give them the sense that we actually play together nice, I think that would be really good for us. Part of what we did was all about sharing knowledge, and I would encourage each and every one of you to become a knowledge broker. So if information is the currency that we have, you can either be a hoarder or a broker, right? And I don't necessarily mean hoarder because you're evil and you're keeping it close to your chest. It's just because you're busy, right? But I was, considering that this is an information-driven organization, I would fire things out to people and say, here's this. And it was interesting to me that a number of people said, kind of gave me the impression that was the first time someone had shared something with them. I was thinking, oh my God, you gotta be doing this, right? It's not about me competing or whatever. It's just saying, hey, here's some stuff. If you want to follow it up, great. If not, that's fine too, right? But there's a lot of power in being able to share information with people. I've done it throughout my career. And it's amazing how much people appreciate that and how much they actually come to rely on the fact that someone's going to send them information. And you can become, that person that everyone goes to do that. Doesn't take a huge amount of time to do, but it really adds a lot of value, both for you and for the people that you send it out to. So I would really, really encourage people to do that. So no one is more surprised than me that even after spending $5 million, the oil sands problems aren't solved. I'd have thought, that it would be okay. But there's a ton more to do. And we just recently completed a workshop where we got people together to talk about kind of what do we see coming up in the next 5 to 10 years, and are we ready to deal with it? Do we have the capacity to do that? It didn't turn out the way I expected, and a lot of people commented on that. They expected most people would get into the weeds or into the nitty-gritty technical stuff, and in fact, it ended up being well past 50,000 feet in many cases. But it's really interesting because it does point to a whole bunch of areas that require work, some of which are around communication and information more so than the true science part. But the reality is, if you've done a whole bunch of science and no one knows about it, have you really done anything, right? But if you can figure out what kinds of things people want to know about and get that information out to them, then I think there's a lot of value in doing that. And I'm just putting together the results of our survey on research and information needs, and the same thing is coming up. Some of the information needs that people have identified, you say, but it's there, right? But if people don't know about it, then it may as well not be there. So I think both those documents are really going to be interesting for people to look at, particularly if you're looking for things that you might want to work on in the future. It'll give you a sense for where some of the pressure points are that people are interested in getting information about. And some of these will have come from government, some will have come from industry, some will be coming from people who have a very different perspective. And you can look at those and say, well, I could help here, or I could put together a team and we could talk about doing that. So most of all, the most important lesson is really about surrounding yourself with a lot of really cool people. That's what I loved about being here. I did stuff that was completely outside my comfort zone and was really cool, right? And then I did stuff that I would normally do a lot, and I had a lot of information about. That was fun too, but it's a little bit different than having the opportunity to work with people who think completely differently than you, who have a very different perspective on things, do things in a completely different way. And that's a message for all of us, I think, is don't just stay in your own group. Get out there and work with a bunch of different people. And that was it.
Thank you, Chris. We have time for questions.
Don't you do
Chris,
control?
you had the slide that showed the research program, especially when you broke the individual projects, you colored them. It looked like you had a plan. Sometimes those plans are all a posteriori, right? They kind of, you have a bit of a vision, you have some theme areas you expected to fund some work in or some work to be done, but sometimes the plan actually reveals itself during the process or after the fact. The pieces of the puzzle actually start to come together, but you didn't design them that way. So curious, but knowing you, I suspect you had a plan, some kind of vision beforehand. I wonder how much those two line up, what you ended up with versus when you walked into this, what you thought you were maybe going to steer this towards.
I think at a very high level, it may have been there, but all those linkages and stuff, you're right. It's after the fact. But I think it's still, as you move on, right? So you start off with just a few projects. You don't necessarily have those linkages, but the more you build that project base, the more that they become linked. And you don't have to have them linked. You can have a one-off project that's still really cool. And if you wanted, you could stretch the linkages and say, well, it's sort of kind of related to that. I didn't want to do that. But you're right. You start off with kind of a general vision of what you want to accomplish, and I think that's true. In Mohammed's chart as well. That's the vision, but and his is a fairly constrained environment. When you look at my program, it's got all these different focus areas. It's a little bit different when you're doing that, and if you have just either a single project with sub-projects under it. So I think it really depends on the structure, but I think it's still valuable to reflect back and say, well, you should make those linkages for people because they would find it useful. And if they think you're a giant brain as a result, well, that's cool too, right? But you're right, a lot of it comes afterwards.
Chris, I'm sort of just musing on your words about peer-reviewed publications, and I share your, I guess I detected it to be sort of disappointment that non-peer-reviewed pieces of information are not valued as they should be, and I've grappled with that too. On the other hand, I think you didn't name one of the most important functions of peer review, which is sort of to ensure a certain level of capability and integrity. And for example, in the thesis that wasn't used instead of the peer-reviewed publication, very often the review process removes unsubstantiated conclusions or unwarranted assumptions. So I wonder if you could just sort of address that in a little bit, something maybe a little bit more holistic and as a solution, and maybe bringing into it the fact that the chart you showed of the information in your database showed an exponential increase since '95, and so there's this sort of information overload and peer review exhaustion. Acceptance rates in the conventional journals have plummeted to well under 20%. The massive increase in online journals of dubious peer-reviewed quality is going to be a game changer in all kinds of ways. How do you synthesize all of that against the fairly simple statement you made about peer review?
So I was doing it to poke people in the eye with a sharp stick, but I think there's a couple of things that bother me. Is a lot of the so-called gray literature stuff is reviewed by people who are really smart and in many cases are experts in their field. So SEMA does a lot of getting their documents out to a broad range of people, getting feedback, coming back in. Personally, if I had a choice between something being labeled peer-reviewed that was done by someone who has no direct experience in the area as opposed to people who have worked in it for 15 years, I would probably lean towards the latter because they probably have a more realistic understanding of how those results might be applied. The second part, I think, is I'm not sure why I would want to rely on someone else's interpretation of what's important, right, or anything like that, because I'm a semi-intelligent guy and I should be able to make that decision myself. If we were doing peer review to help the great unwashed masses who don't know anything, then maybe there's some value to that, but I don't think that that's what we're doing it for. We're doing it so that people believe that it's been reviewed by people who really know what they're talking about and that there's some back and forth that's gone on, and therefore one should place a greater reliance on this particular information than something else. I've been a peer reviewer. I mean, does that mean that document is much better than something else just because I looked at it? I don't know. I know a reasonable amount of stuff and I was able to provide feedback, but I'm not sure that should automatically give it a stamp of approval just because someone peer reviewed it. On the other hand, like I said, there's a lot of reports that are created, including internal reports. You've got an examining committee for theses. Those are smart people, right? They if they were doing their job, they should have been able to say, yes, this is a good document. And it seems to me it's kind of like the student thesis one, right? We're saying that these people are doing really good work. We're giving them a thesis, and yet we send them the message that really that doesn't count. It's this 7-page version that does. I don't know, the whole system kind of bothers me. I was going to be, no, I probably shouldn't. It just, it's a self-reinforcing kind of thing, right? So especially on campus where you're measured by how many things you produce that are peer-reviewed. So you have to do that. So that's the only place you would do it, which means you wouldn't be doing the gray literature necessarily, although you've got one, and people should be looking at that and using that as information, right? So you have to do them, and therefore you want to support other people by being a peer reviewer, and so it creates this self-reinforcing cycle that I don't think is necessarily good. But as the survey shows, that's what everyone wants. So what am I going to do?
Can I just follow up on that? The other thing that I think we need to think about is that the peer-reviewed literature, I mean, for us, that's what we go to, and that's what's easily accessible. We've got gray literature. It's always so hard to find gray literature. But to the great unwashed masses, much of the peer-reviewed literature is not available. They can't get those journals.
Well, even guys in government on SEMA were saying, could someone give them a copy of it, right? So
they can't get it. So we have this illusion as scientists that when we've published in the peer-reviewed literature, we've done good, we've made good in our promise to society to do research and make that information available, when in fact it's largely available to other people like us.